Hi, everybody. How are you today? Thank you for joining us for today's webcast. This is Slides, Negatives, and Prints, Digitizing Your Photographic Collections. Photographic materials include a wide range of media types. Historically, the glass and metal plates of the 19th century gave way to various plastic films in the 20th century. Incrementally, formats became more standardized, and the stability and longevity of films and prints improved. Still, a film collection spanning even a few years may include several formats that each pose different challenges. We're broadcasting today from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I'm Beth Brevik, Sales Account Manager here at Backstage Library Works. And I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter. Kelly Barrall is Vice President of Digitization Services for Backstage. She leads a team that produces digital images and related metadata for libraries and archives just like yours. We'll be recording today's presentation, and that recording will be available to you in the coming days. We'll be emailing you a link. Attendees' lines are muted, so please direct any questions or comments through the questions panel. For background, if you're new to Backstage, we've been serving libraries, museums, and archives for about 40 years. Our operations have grown in size and scope over the years to meet the processing needs of the community. In addition to digitizing or to digital imaging, we offer microfilming, cataloging, shelf-ready processing, authority control and record cleanup, archival processing, inventory, and other services. Our perspective is that every single project is unique and the workflow we use should be flexible and customizable. Our digitization department processes around 130 projects annually, from small to large, and we see a variety of material types pass through our doors. So let's talk about digitizing photographic collections. Kelly, what can you tell us?
Thank you, Beth. As Beth has mentioned, my name is Kelly Barrall. I am the VP of Digitization here at Backstage. Two formats we get asked about a lot are transmissives and photographs. Photographs sort of speak for themselves, so I don't think we need to define them. But transmissives are any material where light can pass through it, as opposed to materials like paper that are functionally opaque. This would include glass, plastic, and all kinds of film, like microforms or negatives. Digitizing this format is fundamentally different from working with prints and photographs, particularly when you are using overhead or planetary arrays. When we work with paper, we use directed light from around and above the object to get the capture we need. When you digitize a transmissive material, like film or glass plate negatives, you switch to having the light below the item and light is shot up through it. Balancing the contrast and tonal qualities of print materials is fairly straightforward. When you work with film or slides, there's a bit more work to make sure the light balance is correct. We aren't going to get too technical in this webinar, and you can check out FAGI guidelines to see what data points you need to hit. Instead, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some of the challenges alongside some visuals. The pictures here on the slides are pulled from the Berkeley Folk Music Festival archive, which is housed in Northwestern University's library. Above these pictures are histograms, which you can see in Photoshop or most image editing software. Histograms display the tonal curve. The goal when digitizing transmissives is to pull out as much detail as possible from the item. If there's too much light, you can blow the image out in highlights. You can see how this gentleman's forehead and hand, for example, have no detail in the picture on the left. If there's too little light, you eclipse everything in shadow. In the far right picture, we lose all the detail of the bookshelves in the background. So the key is to have clear midtones. When you work with negatives or other types of processed film, you have to bear in mind that it is frequently not all exposed identically. In fact, within a single reel or sheet of film, you may find different exposures. It's going to fluctuate depending on whether the shot was taken indoors or outdoors, whether it was daytime or nighttime. It may even change based on how the film was processed between batches. Color correction programs and equipment calibration will help you capture the full spectrum of light and dark tones. In this slide, we have an example here from Mike Cabreza. Mike is the Technical Services Assistant Manager here at Backstage. He took this shot in 1992 on Highway 1 near Santa Cruz. You can see how delicate the contrast is between the sky, sea, and the clouds. And I think looking at this, you can tell that's part of what makes this shot so stunning. If any of these values get clipped, we lose a lot of the impact from the resource. Mike digitized this for us, so he was aware of exactly how he wanted it to look when it was done. But when we work with materials where we don't necessarily know the photographer's intent, we have to be pretty careful. We call this the speculative artist intention. If we have a sense of what the photographer was trying to do, how they were trying to line up the shot, it can help us get the best final result. Having experience with analog photography can actually help a bit when working with negatives. Whether you're digitizing print photographs or negatives, you'll need to make sure you have an unobstructed capture area. Since you can see both sides of a transparent object, the first thing to be aware of is that you should wear gloves when handling film. You don't want to get fingerprints or oils on either side of the film. Also, rather than remove dust with a brush or cloth, we always used ionized compressed air. The more you are pressing on the film or dragging on it, the more likely it is that you're going to accidentally scratch it. Before you start working, make sure that the space you're in is as dust-free as possible so that ambient particulate isn't drifting or landing on your setup. We spent a lot of focus so far on film negatives. So to speak of photographs for a second, you might need to consider what they're stored in. Some photos have sleeves, or they might be in frames. Typically, those are going to need to be removed from their housing to get an unobstructed capture. That said, there could be some extenuating circumstances that make it wiser to digitize them in their frames, for example. We don't want to damage originals when we're digitizing. So if there are reasons why items shouldn't be removed from their carriers, you'll need to consider how to work around that. And lastly, you may want to consider going through and weeding your duplicates. It's not uncommon to have multiples of negatives, for example, and if you don't need it all digitized, it's best to set those extras aside before you start working. It's hard to do that sort of thing while you're digitizing the collection, and it's going to save a lot of time and money in the long run. We use phase 1 cameras ranging from 80 megapixels to 150 megapixels that let us capture up to 5,000 ppi. At minimum, you'll want something that can handle at least 300 ppi. Our setup lets us handle from small film frames up to large glass plates. From there, we make good use of adjustable lenses, light boxes, and film carriers that help us make sure we're getting as aligned a capture as possible, while ensuring the materials are plenty safe. And lastly, we mentioned calibrating your equipment before. We do this at the start of every day and every shift using color and grayscale targets. We also mentioned about wearing gloves and dusting your material. Our process for safe film handling is to remove the film or from its housing right before it's digitized. Clean the photo or negative using ionized compressed air. Then, once you've got your image, return the film to its housing. If you are working with photos from an album or frame, you may instead separate everything from its housing in small batches and store them in something a little easier to get in and out of. Whether you decide the goal is to expose materials as little as possible. So, let's say you have photos and their negatives in the collection. Which one are you going to digitize? There are arguments for one or the other, or even doing both. Ultimately, it comes down to what type of collection you're working with, as well as the conditions it's in. Negatives are better for getting as detailed as a result as possible. Photos are better for representing the artist's interpretation. That's simply simplifying things a bit, so let's go through some examples. Negatives and other transmissives typically offer better detail than print derivatives. The right-hand picture is an accurately digitized photographic print. When you compare it to the negative, you can see how much detail was lost, perhaps due to fading or some other issue when the photo was developed. The loss of detail is most evident in the top left individual's polka-dotted shirt, which is totally indisguisable in the photo. Each of their faces have lost a lot of detail in their definition too. The other thing I want to point out is that the photograph was cropped. The negative has a wider field of view. And while that might not make too much difference in this particular image, the loss of detail in other images could be more problematic. Another reason to work from negative would be if the photographic print is damaged. Obviously, any materials can be scratched, bent, torn, or stained. Photographs can become discolored or faded over time if they were produced around the middle of the last century. In these photos, you can see that both have yellowed a bit. The picture on the right is definitely starting to fade. It's less clear because we've got the images scaled down for the purpose of this webinar, but there's a big crease running down the edge of the left-hand photo. If we have the original photographic negatives for these, we might consider working from them instead of these copies. All of that said, there are plenty of situations where working from a print is going to make more sense. If your goal is to represent the artistic vision from a collection, and you really want to highlight the photographer's intent, then print is the better choice. In this example, you can see the decision that was made to crop the image as well as adjust the tone. The digitized negative has a lot of detail, but the photo is a bit warmer, and your eye is drawn to the photographer's focus. The dark contrast against the subject's profile makes him really stand out. Just like photographs, negatives can get damaged too. We have a very tragically shattered glass plate negative on the left, and the film on the right shows some discoloration and damage. When the original negative is too damaged to get a clear capture, you'll want to consider digitizing the print derivative instead. So today we talked about transmissives and how they often provide the highest level of visual detail, but they can be difficult to digitize and maybe suffer from various forms of physical damage such as scratches, discoloration, issues with slide mounts, or general decay. Photographic prints, on the other hand, reflect the creator's original artistic intent, but are essentially reproductions. They can also suffer from similar types of damage as other reproduced media. Ultimately, the uniqueness of each collection may warrant an argument for digitizing both formats. So thank you everyone for taking the time to tune in today. I'd like to turn it back to Beth and see if we have any questions that we can answer.
Thank you so much, Kelly. So we do have plenty of time today to address questions. We also have Andreas Otto, our digitization technology manager. He's joining Kelly, so we have all the experts present. So any questions that you have, they can answer. And we'll just have you answer or tab there. Okay, so we do have a question that's come up. Susan Anderson Bauer asks, if needing a quote for digitization from Backstage, what info do you need me to provide?
Sure, I can answer that. So we work with the sales account manager to send over a questionnaire, and it provides basic questions in terms of, how is your collection housed? What is the condition of your collection? And we do like to see a breakout of the formats. As we digitize transmissives and print photographs, each format requires its different PPI in terms of size to get the best results, especially when we're falling faggy here at Backstage. So if you have an inventory of, let's say, your 35mm slides versus how many 5x7 negative sheet film you have, and or prints, that would be great. The other information that we like to know is how your collection is housed. Are they mixed media? Meaning we're going to open a box and find a mix of negatives and slides and prints all in the same housing, or is your collection separate so that all 35mm slides are in one box and all of your 5x7 negatives are in another? Not that it matters, and we always encourage our clients to keep their collection as best housed to fit their needs. We just like to know that in terms of how much handling we'll need on camera, as each camera setup would account for some time in between switching between formats. And then when it comes to transmissives and photographs, we, as in any collection, even if you're digitizing from paper, metadata is a key factor when providing pricing. Is this metadata that you're going to provide that we would apply to the file naming scheming and or TIFF headers? Or are you going to ask us to key things from, like, say, the 35mm slide mounts? If we're keying from slide mounts, that's no problem, but we like to know, what are we keying? What's important? And, examples of it, because when it comes to all types of materials, they're unique in nature. So, one solution doesn't fit all, and we like to provide customized pricing. And sample pictures are always the best if you have any damaged materials. But overall, I think that's probably the key points we would need to get a quote together. And if needed, we could always jump on a call and go through some of the finer points.
Okay, the next question comes from Susan, Rebecca Altermat. I have to look back and forth because my eyes are getting older. For a small shop, what is the best kind of scanner to use or purchase for negatives?
I'm going to toss that over to my colleague Andreas and let him answer that one.
Sure, I'd be glad to answer that. I think, as was mentioned during the setup, we use digital cameras for capturing our negatives and transmissive materials. You can use dedicated film scanners, flatbed scanners, or orbital scanners. All of those will do the job, but using a digital camera setup with on a copy stand will give you the most flexibility. You can shoot capture multiple formats with this kind of a setup, something that you can't do on dedicated scanners. And you can also do setups where you can actually capture the metadata on a slide mount, for example, at the same time as you're capturing the content of the slide. So I would definitely recommend a digital camera for capture.
All right. Jessica Goodman asks, do you have any recommendations for contact sheets? I do not have the negatives or the prints, but the contact sheets have some useful images.
I think I'll start with that because then I'll ask Andreas if he might have a more technical. We have worked with contact sheets, and we've also created contact sheets for similar reasons, like Andreas had said, for ease of collecting metadata. I think the same setup, maybe with a slightly higher PPI of 600 or so. So you're capturing it exactly how you would a paper document. In terms of overhead light and a copyboard stand, that will give you a nice high quality TIFF. In terms of maybe getting more detail out of the image on the contact sheet, that's where I'll ask Andreas if he has any thoughts.
Andreas, are you there?
He may have lost connectivity, and I apologize. So what I had said was capturing at 600 PPI, capturing the contact sheet is usually 8.5 by 11. That should give you enough detail to be able to zoom in and extrapolate some of the detail in the image itself, and definitely any kind of metadata that is on, assuming it's a contact sheet of slide mounts.
Okay. We'll see if Andreas can get reconnected with us, but we'll go ahead and move along to Barbara Zaborowski. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I apologize if I didn't. Asking, how can I digitize using equipment I may have on hand? I can't afford the high-end scanner that you showed in your presentation.
Right, that's a really good question. I think Andreas kind of touched a little bit towards that. You may not, like you said, you may not have the equipment we have with the overhead area rate cameras. You can capture on flatbeds, or orbital cameras they're a little less expensive. There are, I should say, some equipment available to capture that is lower cost. So you should be able to digitize it. Whatever your collection is, the only difference is that you're not going to be able to get the higher PPI as we had mentioned with the larger digital cameras that we employ here at Backstage.
Okay. Heidi Sprode asks the question, bound newspapers, is it best to unbind the volume first? And I think that's a good topic to touch on, for sure.
That's a whole webinar of itself, but I'd be happy to comment on that. It's a really great question. So here, like we mentioned, we use up to 150 megapixel camera, and that's been great since we've added it because of some of your older newspapers from the 1800s. Your width by height of a page, they're much larger than they are in modern newspapers, or even newspapers from the 1920s, 1930s. So it allows us to capture 2 pages at a time. So you're working with a digital vendor, the unit price usually comes from how much labor goes into capturing. And anytime we can capture something as 2 pages at a time versus 1 page, that brings that cost down a little bit. But in terms of bound newspapers, it really depends on a few things. Mostly the condition of the paper. Are they fragile, brittle? Do they turn with ease? And then the binding itself, because the way that, I'm not a binder and I wasn't around when these newspapers were bound, but you also have 2-page spreads and things, and they just took issues and they just chopped the edges and then bound them. And I highly doubt, in my experience, I've seen that no 2 issues were bound with enough inner margin where the strings are cut into the content, so that you open the 2-page spreads, those strings are just obliterating the text in the gutter. So if they open with ease, then the paper content or the paper condition is really good, and it can open and lay flat and be flattened with glass, and there's no loss inside the gutter, capture it as the 2-page spread without just binding. any of those condition issues where they start to break or there's text loss, it may make sense to, if not loosen the gutter, but at least maybe digitize to single pages. So I don't think if you have a newspaper collection that spans multiple decades, I don't think you can treat the whole collection the same. It's going to depend on, the different sections within that decade that were printed and how they were bound. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, Jeffrey Skinner asks, we don't have an overhead scanner for transmissive images, so we're using an Epson V600 with a cradle for the slides. Negatives have been more difficult, particularly for negatives that are larger formats. Any advice?
That's a great one for Andreas if he's back on connection.
Yeah, I'm sorry, a little technical difficulty over here. That's a great question. I just like to know what kind of difficulties he's experiencing.
I'm not sure if there's a way to, I suppose you could always go ahead and post another.
I think yeah, Beth, I think I apologize, I didn't capture the individual's name, but we'd be happy to take that offline after the webinar if it would help. Andreas likes a challenge, and we'd love to answer that.
Okay. So then I will go on to Michelle Golian. I'm so sorry if I pronounce anybody's name wrong. I have a large collection of both slides, negatives, and prints. I'm sure there's an overlap between different formats. Is it best practice to digitize all and then find the best format representative afterward, or do the audit before? The prints are not of artistic quality, mostly just from Costco, so artist intent isn't an issue.
Yeah, that's a good question too. We talked about weeding duplicates if that's possible. I think you've identified that the prints aren't of the best quality, so we're really dealing with the slides and the negatives. In my experience, even with a slide, a negative, and you have some different shots of the same image, the photographer is using different lighting and different I forget what they call bracketing. So it may make sense to digitize the whole collection if it fits within your budget. The other thing you can do is you can do it in batches, right? So let's say your whole collection is 30,000 items. Maybe do 10,000 of them without weeding them through, and do both formats and then see, okay, how much redundancy do I have? How much difference is there between the slides and the negatives? Do I really need all of it, or should I go back to one format and help, with the other 2/3 of the collection, knowing that based on the first third, okay, I've gotten more information from my imaging and I can see what I have in my collection a little bit more detailed. I don't need to do the whole thing, or vice versa. Wow, I'm getting so much detail, so many different views of this content. Let's do the whole collection.
Okay. The next question is Alexis Westlake. Would you use Photoshop to correct some of the errors, such as a crease in the photo or correcting a tear, while also displaying what the photograph currently looks like?
I'll answer that and then definitely throw that over to Andreas. Doing what we do here and working with cultural heritage materials, I believe in reproducing the original in its original condition. So I like to see that, there's some existing damage, there's some, fade or aging to it, but I get that you really want to have a great reproduction. So Andreas, what will you do in this instance of fixing or correcting things with imaging software?
Well, as much as I'd be tempted to try to correct it simply because we can do it and Photoshop can do such a good job, it's really going to come down to the client's wishes. What is the client looking for? Does the client want an exact reproduction, or does the client want this enhanced image that represents what it looks like at one time?
Did we lose Beth now?
Sorry about that. I'm on mute. My apologies. Next is Peter Lysy or Lysy. Again, I apologize if it's mispronounced. What are the pros and cons of different digital file formats? Which formats do you recommend and under what circumstances?
So we always recommend the archival TIFF. That is the format that has all of the original data, or DNA as I call it. And then we recommend JPEGs or JPEG 2000 for the access file. Whatever path you go, we always recommend that you have two versions of the image, for example, the TIFF and the JPEG, and then that you store them on two different locations. So perhaps you put the TIFF on a spinning data disk where it's backed up and stored forever, and then you only work with the JPEGs for your access file. Do you have anything else to add, Andres?
No, I would say that if you do have a program that is using raw images and you really want to cover yourself, I would save the original raw files as well, because you can go back to those raw files and do much more with them in terms of making changes that you can't do with the TIFF that was output.
That's a great point. If you're not a photographer expert, so your camera will generate a raw file, and then it would export or output the TIFF file. So he's referring to the software generated raw file.
Okay. The next question is Heidi Sprode. Oh, I'm sorry. The next one is actually Kristen Bertrand. You mentioned PPI depends on format. What are some of the minimums for various formats?
I don't have it memorized. Maybe, Andreas, do you have it memorized?
Yeah, I can quickly get something here.
So what he's looking up is the FAGI guidelines.
Do you have that already, Andres?
Yeah. So for material which is 35 millimeter up to 4x5, the recommendation is a minimum of 3,000 PPI. That would give you a 3-star rating in the FADGI standard, and then 4,000 PPI if you want a 4-star rating, and 4-star being the maximum. For materials that are 4x5 and larger, the minimum would be 1,500 PPI, again for a 3-star rating, and 2,000 for a 4-star rating.
Okay. The next question is Heidi Sprode. She says, do you only work with organizations, or can small historical societies contract with you?
We work with all sorts of clients, from individuals and historical societies, public libraries, academics. The best route to go is to contact Backstage, and we'll start that discussion about what your collection entails, and you'll work with the account manager. We like to help all kinds of folks get their collections digitized, and there may be minimums for small quantities and things like that, but what we've found is that starting small often results in bigger partner relationships with clients.
Next up is Jeffrey Skinner. We are currently working with a collection that includes a number of contact sheets with no corresponding negatives. We're scanning the sheet at 1,200 PPI and then extracting the this was the problems that he was having from earlier. He went ahead and answered that question. We're scanning the sheet at 1,200 PPI and then extracting the individual images. So to remind you of that question, he had said that they're using the Epson B600 with a cradle for the slides, and the negatives have been more difficult, particularly for negatives that are larger formats. Any advice?
I think one of the problems that he might be encountering is that with the flatbed scanners in general, you have limited control in the software. And this goes back to this discussion we just had about raw files. You don't have access to the raw data typically. There's a lot of adjustment that is being made behind the scenes by the scanner that the end user has no control over. And then the controls that you do have are fairly limited, and this may be part of the problem.
Okay. Robert Richard is writing in from Eastern Canada. Hello. When digitizing vintage 18 to 16 millimeter films, color or black and white, is it better to slightly underexpose during capture and then restore the footage in post-production software? In our workflow, films are digitized and exported as TIFF format files, then imported into DaVinci Resolve Studio, where we apply cleaning and restoration plugins. Context: most of these vintage films were already underexposed during their original filming, which complicates the digitization process. Thanks.
I'm balling that right over to Andreas because he talks about equipment, calibration, and post-processing.
Yeah, and that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, in this particular case, we tend to we set up our cameras according to our targets, and then we make adjustments based on the density of the film, not necessarily underexposing them. So I don't know if in this particular scenario underexposure would be a benefit or not, not without seeing it.
Okay. Next up is Paul Canova. When setting up a camera for negatives, do I need to use a different kind of lens than for documents, or is it just a tighter zoom?
I'll take that. Yeah. Yes, you definitely need to use a lens specifically designed for copy work. It needs to be a flat field lens, and it needs to be apochromatic so that all the color channels are focusing at the same point.
Okay. Patty Sproat asks, when you scan, will output be the full text searchable for documents and text such as in newspapers?
So we capture using the area rate camera, export to TIFF files, do all of our quality assurance and editing, cropping, splitting of 2-ups and things like that. Full text search would come from using Abby to create raw OCR behind the PDF.
Okay. Ashley Jordan asks, how do you scan your microfilm?
We use an Eclipse scanner. We scan the entire reel using the ribbon software that comes with the scanner itself. And then in terms of microfilm scanning, assuming you're talking a roll of microfilm, like I said, we scan the whole thing, and we have tiered services, whether you would a digital surrogate or you'd like us to go through and do some metadata. As in the case of newspapers, we can scan the entire reel and send you the TIFFs that represent the frames, or we can scan the entire reel and go through and segregate the individual issues with issue level metadata, or we can go through and look at every image, producing the same issue level, newspaper issue level PDFs with some cleanup. With microfilming, if there was an error or somebody duplicated something or missed something, there may be frames that are out of order or pages that are duplicated. Also, they do intentional second exposures to make sure that they get the results they need in terms of the contrast for the microfilm. We can go through every page and pick out the best one that gets the most content for the search results in the PDF as best possible. So I hope that answers that question in terms of how we scan microfilm.
Okay. Alexis Westlake asks, how do you digitize light sensitive documents?
I'm assuming you're talking paper documents that are light sensitive. We do calibrate the equipment following FAGI guidelines, and we currently use flash photography, which is a very quick exposure to the document itself. To be honest, we haven't gotten a lot of requests where the client has been too concerned with any exposure of light to the documents or items themselves. So we haven't had to adjust our approach, but with our technical services team, they have the capability to use different lighting as needed. I think Andreas had mentioned we have an approach to capture 35mm slides where we're using a light box to capture the image itself, and then we use low light overhead to capture the slide mounts at the same time. So we do have solutions where we can control the light and not always default to flash photography.
Okay, we are going to skip over Jeffrey Skinner's question because that's a conversation that we actually have reached out to him, and so we're going to talk with him offline. Julie Horowitz asks, is it more of a, this is more of a metadata question, but how do you label digital files to indicate if they were taken from a negative or a print image?
That's a great question. We can add TIFF tags that would be specific to the source document or source item if requested.
Okay, Suzanne Priate asks, would you please talk about your post-processing process for color negatives, especially in the absence of any information about the photographer and their intent? I'm aware of FAGI's capture guidelines for this format, but I'm interested in more detailed information on how you process the raw files. Any best practice advice?
Andreas, could you field that one?
Yeah, could you, I'm sorry, I had a little audio break. Can you repeat that?
Absolutely. Would you please talk about your post-processing process for color negatives, especially in the absence of any information about the photographer and their intent? I'm aware of FAGI's capture guidelines for this format, but I'm interested in more detailed information on how you process the raw files. Any best practice advice?
So when it comes to color negatives, we obviously, after we invert the image and set up a basic curve, we evaluate them visually to try to create an image that is pleasing. And as much as we can, we're going to create a batch process that can process entire reel or batches of images. In some cases, the batches are very small. It depends on the consistency of the exposure and the type of material that was captured.
Okay. Sarah Ferguson asks, can you expand on how you capture slides while also capturing the mounts when there is information on them? Is it two different setups?
Andreas, that's where I was speaking of capturing the film itself and with the low level light on top. Would you repeat or maybe elaborate on the setup for us?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it can be done in a single setup. You set up in our case, it's a copy stand with a light source where the slide is. And then you're also using flash in order to eliminate the mount. And that can all be balanced and that can all be done as well.
Yeah, I think his
Yeah, I think that his audio is starting to go out.
yeah. So I mean, basically, he was just confirming what I had said. It can be done in the same setup. You use a light source underneath, like a light box, which exposes the image itself. And then we use overhead light at a lower light, or maybe using the flash at a different setting, so that in one exposure, your image, the resulting TIFF image, shows the image from the film as well as the slide mount. It is one setup.
Okay. Allison Bridger asks, What about photographs and the old sticky albums from the end of the 20th century? I have more than one of those, which has a plastic cover on each page. Removing the prints from the pages can cause damage, so would just removing the plastic cover work?
Yeah, so we've worked with a lot of photo albums of that nature where it's that old tacky thing you peel and well, as long as it's been in there and it's been subject to different temperatures, you know, hot, cold, or whatever, it's almost melting the photo itself, and you're going to lose detail as you pull off that film. So we digitize right through it without removing the film itself. You know, the bigger challenge may be as it being an album, if there's any kind of metal that is the binding itself, and it can't, you know, be digitized as a 2-up using like a book cradle with glass or anything. But I would recommend just leaving it in the page. So in terms of what the output is, then are you looking at the frame? I mean, the image being the page itself, which may have, you know, 2 to 4 photos on it, or do you want the vendor to then take the image and crop out and represent each photo as an individual image?
Okay, I'm just I am looking at the next question. I think that Josh, I don't think that's a question. I think it's just a statement. Oh, here we go. So he works at a library. I wasn't looking below that. He works at a library, and they can already digitize a number of different audiovisual materials, such as VHS, high-8 videotape, vinyl. They can scan 35 millimeter. He says, is there any other media you guys can think of that's able to be digitized?
Any other media that could be digitized? So one thing we don't do at Backstage is we do not do audiovisual. There are a select few vendors that are more than capable of doing audiovisual. In terms of other media, there's, you know, slides, daguerreotypes, microfilm, negative sheets, 35 millimeter negative, glass plates. The other format that we currently don't do, and I don't think we have plans to do, is nitrate negatives, just because of the history there with them being combustible. And there are other vendors that have the facilities that ensure the safety of the film and the facility itself with storage. I can't think of anything else, and I'm not really sure if Andreas figured out his technology problems.
And I think you covered it all, Kelly.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Melissa Coy says, could you tell us more about how to digitize slides? What should my setup look like?
Sure. So we have we recommend the digital camera with the lens that Andreas detailed prior to, and using a slide holder and a trans-illuminated light box. So that's a light box that doesn't yield off too much heat, and setting up at least for the 3,500 PPI for the slides.
Okay, I apologize. Were you just asking a question, Kelly? I was feeling another question that I received separately.
Nope, I got it.
Okay. So I do want to ask this. As Kelly and Andreas did mention before, we're big believers on capturing the image as it is and preserving it that way. For some literature that we've seen, it pays to be careful with AI. Current generative engines may recreate an image entirely, not just merely adjust the color scheme. So what are your thoughts on using AI-based image enhancement?
That's a question for us, Beth?
Yep.
I think the potential for AI exists across all industries. what that means for backstage and using AI in terms of digitizing or adjusting or interpreting the digital imaging that we do is TBD. I don't foresee that AI would be used to manipulate the images to produce a certain aspect of what the image may look like. Is there potential for, capturing cultural heritage materials using FADGI guidelines and having the archival TIFF image and maybe a second set that is ran through AI? I don't have the answer for that. There's a lot of discussion in our industry about AI and how it can be resourced for, more like metadata, maybe some image editing. Could an AI engine, crop an image better than, some of the image editing software? It's a great question, and it's a good discussion going on, but my understanding is that a lot of the software or other tools that we use or may have been using for several years already use some sort of source of AI, and I just don't know really. I really don't have a personal perspective on that question at this point.
Okay, and then just jumping back really quick to the last question that I had from Melissa Coy. She was asking about the slides and what the setup should look like. She was asking for some clarification. 3,500 PPI for slides.
Andres, what is the PPI for slides?
It's 3,000 and 4,000 for the 3-star, 4-star ratings, respectively.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jenny Bowen asks, what is the best way to clean glass plate negatives?
Well, for any format that we use the ionized compressed canned air. We are not a conservation vendor, so we don't do anything other than use a gust of the ionized canned air. There may be other methods that we just don't have experience or can comment on that.
Okay. And of course, there was also the question about that I had asked about the AI. Robert Richard had also asked. I'm sorry. I missed that was Randolph York had asked, what are your thoughts on using AI enhancement on black and white photographs, such as colorization? I don't know that would necessarily be much of a different answer than what you had asked, or than what you had answered.
Right. I don't really have any thoughts on that other than what I had said in contrast to the other question.
Okay. Robert Richard had asked, can you repeat the type of camera used to copy the slides with the light box?
Right. We use a phase 1 camera.
Okay. And it looks like the last question that we have here is, we've got some fragile negatives in the sleeve. How can we digitize them?
Fragile in terms of in the sleeve, I'm assuming that similar to the photo album question, where they've been housed in the sleeve for a very long time and they've kind of started to maybe gel together. It's a really good question. It would depend on the condition and what would happen to them if they were removed. I believe we could do a custom setup to capture them through the sleeve. There may be some inherent inherent quality degradation from doing so, but I believe we could do it without removing it and causing any damage. It would just be a unique setup, and I think we would have to maybe do some sampling to set the expectation of, what that involvement between the sleeve and the negative may introduce during the capture. But it would be done on a light box without any added layering of glass or anything. So it would just be what imaging you would get from it being in its current sleeve.
Okay, thank you for that question, Muriel. And I said that was the last one. We do actually have one last, and we'll have to go ahead and wrap up with this one. This is Julian asking, what handling recommendations do you have for digitizing broken glass plate slides on a flatbed? We don't have prints or other alternative options to scan instead, nor do we have a camera setup.
So when we handle glass plate negatives, we use nitrile gloves. We use nylon for negatives and photographs prints, but we use nitrile gloves when handling glass plates. That not only make sure that you're handling them without any added unsafe practices, and it also protects the individual who is handling them. I think your best approach, and Andreas may have a comment too, is just to be extremely careful and place them on the flatbed as careful as you can, aligning it in your image zone and going from there.
Okay, that was a lot of questions, fantastic questions. Thank you so much to everybody for submitting those. And yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. We will be sending out a recording of the webinar here in the coming days. And of course, if you do have any questions, please feel free to write to us here at the info@bslw.com, and we'll be sure to answer your questions. If you want to get a little bit more in depth, we can certainly pass some of these questions along to Kelly and to Andreas and make sure that everything is covered, that everything is covered there. Thank you again to Kelly so much, VP of Digitization Services here at Backstage, for hosting, and also to Andreas Otto for helping to answer our questions. Thank you so much, everybody.
All right, thank you. Take care.